In the dimly lit room, as evening descended, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house. My heart, already heavy with grief, skipped a beat. I wiped away the tears from my cheeks, my fingers trembling as I glanced at the monitor beside the door. There, on the screen, stood my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law Cindy, side by side, staring up at the house. For a moment, I thought, have they come to help? I hurried toward the entrance, a small flicker of hope igniting in my chest. When I opened the door, the sight that greeted me sent shockwaves through my already fragile state. My mother-in-law was standing there with a stern look on her face. Behind her were several men, movers from the looks of it, waiting with boxes in hand. "Come on," my mother-in-law called out to them. "Bring everything in." I was too stunned to speak at first. The movers began filing into the house without a word, brushing past me as if I wasn't there. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice weak, barely audible. But before I could gather my thoughts, my son Ryan came rushing down from his room, his footsteps pounding down the staircase. "What's the matter, Mom?" Ryan asked, his face filled with confusion as he watched the strangers moving about, placing boxes and furniture in the living room. The sight was as bizarre as it was unsettling. My mother-in-law, standing firm, turned to us and said, "We're taking over. This house belongs to us now, and you need to leave." Cindy, standing beside her, nodded in agreement, her arms crossed over her chest as if she were making some kind of official declaration. I was at a loss for words. Ryan stood beside me, equally confused. "Leave? What do you mean, leave?" he asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "You heard me?" my mother-in-law said coldly. "Pack your things and go." As the movers continued to unload boxes and move furniture into different rooms, my father-in-law entered the house, directing the movers with casual authority, as though he had done this 100 times before. It felt like a nightmare, surreal, as though none of it was actually happening. But the panic in my chest was real, and I could see the fear in Ryan's eyes. Ryan, pale as a sheet, looked at the chaos around him, and then back at me. His voice was trembling as he spoke. "This isn't right. Don't you understand? This house doesn't belong to Dad anymore, and there are ghosts here." My father-in-law froze, as did the movers, as all eyes turned to Ryan. His words hung in the air, chilling the atmosphere of the already tense moment. I had no idea what Ryan was talking about, but his fear was palpable. He was trembling, his fists clenched at his sides. "Ghosts?" my mother-in-law scoffed, but there was an unmistakable flicker of unease in her eyes. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards and the distant ticking of a clock. The movers stopped in their tracks, unsure of what to do next. Ryan's gaze shifted from the stunned faces of our family to mine, and I realized then that he was not just afraid, he was convinced that something dark and unexplainable had taken hold of this house. "My name is Amy. I'm 41 years old, and my husband Jason was 42 when he passed away just a few months ago. Jason was a gentle soul. He didn't drink, smoke, or gamble. He spent his days working hard as an employee at a local company and his evenings watching movies with me and our son Ryan until Ryan grew too busy with his school life. Jason was my rock, the foundation of our little family. He was the kind of man who made you feel safe no matter how stormy life got. We had a beautiful home together, a house Jason had picked out himself, with every detail planned meticulously. He always said he was happy here, with me and Ryan, and he worked tirelessly to make sure we never wanted for anything. Our home had a mortgage, sure, but Jason had everything planned. He had even made sure that, in the event of his passing, we would be financially stable. Or so I thought. Little did I know that after Jason's diagnosis, our entire world would collapse. Jason was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago. What began as minor stomach discomfort soon revealed a terrifying truth. The cancer had already spread throughout his body. Surgery wasn't an option, and without it, doctors gave him only a few months to live. Those months were the darkest days of our lives. I watched my strong, kind husband wither away before my eyes, powerless to stop it. As his health deteriorated, The burden of medical bills grew heavier. We had insurance, but it barely covered the basics, and our savings were quickly draining. With the mortgage still looming over us, I didn't know how we would survive. I had no family to turn to for help, but Jason, ever the optimist, suggested we ask his parents. Surely they would step in during such a desperate time. But when we approached them, they didn't offer a shred of support. In fact, they turned us away. "We just finished paying off our debts," Jason's mother had said, her voice cold and distant. "We can't help you now." It was a crushing blow. I had always known Jason's relationship with his family was strained, but I never expected this level of callousness. Jason had sent them money when he was younger, helped them through tough times, and now, when we needed them most, they refused to lift a finger. Desperate and heartbroken, Jason and I began discussing the possibility of selling our home. It was the last thing we wanted to do, but with medical bills piling up and no help in sight, it seemed like our only option. Just when we thought all hope was lost, Jason had an idea. He reached out to an old friend, Brian, someone from his high school days whom he hadn't seen in years. Brian had gone into real estate and was doing well for himself. When Jason explained our situation, Brian immediately offered to help. He proposed buying our house at a fair price and leasing it back to us for a minimal fee. It was an incredibly generous offer, and although Jason was initially hesitant, I could see the relief in his eyes. The deal was finalized quickly, and just like that, Brian became the owner of our home. We stayed in the house, paying a mere $100 a month in rent, a fraction of what we would have paid elsewhere. Jason was grateful, more than grateful, but there was still a sadness in him, knowing that he would never see our home as it once was. Despite the bleakness of our situation, we managed to create beautiful memories in those last few months. Jason, Ryan, and I spent every moment together, cherishing the time we had left. But as the cancer spread, Jason's condition worsened. The doctors eventually told us that he wouldn't be coming home again. His body was too weak, and it was only a matter of time. When I called Jason's family to inform them, they seemed indifferent, almost as if they were just waiting for him to pass so they could move on with their lives. In the end, it wasn't his parents or his sister who stood by his bedside. It was me, Ryan, and Brian. Jason passed away peacefully, surrounded by the people who truly cared about him. After the funeral, Brian helped with the arrangements, and we returned to the house to begin the painful process of moving forward. That was when the doorbell rang, and my mother-in-law and Cindy showed up with movers in tow. It was as if they had been waiting for Jason's death to stake their claim on the house. The fact that we were still grieving didn't seem to matter to them. They were cold and calculating, determined to take what they believed was rightfully theirs. But they didn't know the full story. They didn't know that Jason had already sold the house to Brian and that we were still living there legally. As Ryan stood trembling in the living room, warning them about the supposed ghosts, I realized that he was doing more than just trying to scare them. He was trying to protect our home, our memories. Brian arrived just in time, his voice booming through the house as he ordered the movers to stop. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his presence commanding attention. My mother-in-law and Cindy froze, their faces paling as they realized they were no longer in control. Brian explained the situation calmly, but firmly. "This house belongs to me now," he said, his eyes cold as he looked at Jason's parents. "And Amy and Ryan are staying here. If you want to rent a place, I can find you something more suitable, but this house is off limits." The shock on their faces was almost satisfying. For the first time, they were on the receiving end of a power they couldn't manipulate or control. Brian's intervention was a lifeline for us, but it wasn't just about the house. It was about the loyalty and friendship he had shared with Jason. They had been friends since high school, and despite the years and the distance, Brian had never forgotten what Jason had done for him all those years ago. As the movers began to pack up the boxes they had just brought in, Cindy broke down in tears on the front steps. My father-in-law, usually so composed, looked lost, unsure of what to do next. "But we thought," my mother-in-law started, but her voice trailed off as Brian stared her down. "You thought wrong," he said, his voice sharp. "Now if you're done here, I suggest you leave." With that, he turned his back on them and walked back into the house. Ryan and I followed him, shutting the door behind us. It was over. The house was ours again, and my in-laws had no claim to it. But the victory felt bittersweet. Jason was gone, and no amount of legal ownership could fill the void he had left behind. As I sat in the living room that night, the house finally quiet and still, I thought about all the moments we had shared here. The laughter, the tears, the love. It was all still here, woven into the very walls of the house. In the weeks that followed, зрение, мы вернулись к нашей жизни как могли. Brian kept his promise, and we continued to live in the house, paying only a token amount in rent. He visited often, checking in on us and making sure we were doing okay. Ryan, still shaken by everything that had happened, started spending more time at home, retreating into the familiar comfort of his room. The ghosts he had spoken of that day weren't real, of course, but in a way, they represented something much deeper. They were the ghosts of our past, the memories that lingered in every corner of the house. And though they couldn't harm us, they were always there, reminding us of what we had lost. Brian became more than just a friend to us. He became a part of our family. His loyalty to Jason extended to us, and I knew that as long as he was around, we would never be alone. Now, 2 years have passed since Jason's death, and life has slowly begun to find its rhythm again. The house is still ours, and the memories we made here continue to bring us comfort. My mother-in-law and Cindy have moved on, living in a small apartment Brian found for them. We don't see them much anymore, and honestly, I don't mind. They were never really a part of our lives in the way that family should be. But Brian is different. He visits regularly, always bringing a smile and a story about Jason. And each time he comes, it feels like a piece of Jason is still with us, laughing along, sharing in the memories. I know that Jason would be proud of how we've managed to move forward, how we've held onto the house he loved so much. And even though he's gone, his presence will always be here, in the walls, in the memories, and in the hearts of those